At the beginning of this course, we looked at how to add multiple pages to our site. Now it's time to link those pages together and turn them into an experience that a visitor can navigate. All right, to get us started, I've created a little sample website that has a few pages on it that we can actually link to. So we'll start with the homepage, and we'll start with these navigation buttons in the homepage. In fact, they're not navigation buttons at all right now. They're just regular old text boxes. So to turn one of these into a link, all we need to do is select it. And then at the very top of the properties panel, you'll see link with a little plus sign. Now you can either click here, or as long as you have an element selected and not a range of text, you can also just press the letter L on the keyboard. And pressing L will add a link, and it'll focus the link to field where you can either paste in the URL of an external site, or you can start typing the name of one of your own pages. So for example, we want pricing to link to pricing. I could just select it from the drop-down menu. We don't have that many pages on this site, but let's say that we did. Let's say that I wanted to type pricing. As soon as I start typing, it's going to filter down to show things that match, which includes the pricing page itself. But because the pricing page also has some sub pages within it, those show up as well. If I want to see only the sub pages, I can type pricing followed by a slash. And that slash actually kind of simplifies this dropdown and doesn't show things that aren't children of the pricing page. But since this is the main pricing page I want to link to, I'm going to go back, and with pricing highlighted, I'll just hit return, and boom, now we are linking to the pricing page. You'll notice below there are a couple of settings here. We have the new tab option, which means do we want this to open in a new browser tab when someone clicks on it? When linking to pages within your own site, typically you'd want the answer to be no. You don't want to be opening tabs and windows on the visitor's computer every time they click on a link. So I'm going to leave that set to no. And the next property is something called style. Now, style shows up because the layer that I'm linking from here is a text layer. And I also want to point out, you can highlight a range of text and create a link from that. In this case, it's an entire text layer that just has one word in it, and that's fine too. But anytime you're linking from text, you're going to get this style property here. And when you click on it, you get this little modal where you can manage your link styles. So the idea is that rather than styling each link one at a time and having to redo that work over and over again, we instead create what's called a link style, and then we choose which link style we want to apply each time we create a new text link. So here it's created a default style for us. We can either edit this, or we can just create a new style here. I think what I'm going to do here is create a new style because I like this blue type of hyperlink. I like that within the context of a paragraph. But for our nav bar, I would like to do something a little bit different. I kind of want it to look more the way it did before I added this link with the dark text. So I'm going to click New Style. And then here, link to, I can right click on this and choose to rename it. And I can name this nav link so that I don't get confused later. And then when I mouse over it, I can choose the edit button. And here, this is what link styles are all about. We're going to choose a style for the default state of the link when it's just sitting there not doing anything. Then we're going to choose a style for how the link appears when the visitor mouses their cursor over it, which is called hover. And then we have a style called current, which is for when the link links to the page that we're currently looking at, so that we can let visitors know, hey, this is where you are right now. So for this, I'm actually going to change the default color. I'm going to switch this to the 666 hex code that it was before. And I'm going to go back, and let's leave the hover color on blue so that we can actually see something happening when we hover over it. Another thing that we can do, because by default, this switch from the default state over to the hover state is going to be instantaneous, we can also click here to add a transition and have it kind of ease in and out. And that has its own little dialogue here where we can play with the timing and the delay of things. I'm actually going to bring the time down a little bit. 0.2 or 0.3 seconds keeps it nice and snappy, but because it's animated, it's got a little extra smoothness to it. I'm going to go back here, and for the current color, this is really debatable and subjective, but I'm going to set this to the color we had before, our default color. And I'm going to go back, and I'm going to leave the decoration set to underline. So even if we decide not to change the color, we can still use an underline as some sort of signifier that this link is special. Cool. And all the choices I've made here aren't just for this link, but for this link style, which I can now go apply to the other links. Now, there are a couple of items in my nav bar that actually aren't meant to link to other pages of this site. I want them to link to corresponding sections that are on this current page, that are on the home page. If I scroll down, we have a little features section here. And if I scroll even further, we have what our users say. In other words, testimonials. So back up at the top in my nav bar, sure enough, I have an item here for features and I have an item here for testimonials. To link to a section of a web page, we just have one little bit of setup to do. We've got to find the frame that represents the section, or at least that represents the top of the section. Here, I do have a frame for my entire features section. And with that selected, I'm going to go down to the bottom of the properties panel, and I'm going to add a scroll section. We can give this scroll section a name. I'm going to leave the name at features. And then we also have the option to create an offset. And again, when you link to a scroll section, the top of that section is going to align with the top of the browser. It's going to slide up and it's going to stop when it reaches the top of the browser. So using offset Y, we can say stop a little bit lower or stop a little bit higher. So that way we can compensate for design elements that are getting cut off, or perhaps you have a fixed nav bar and you want this to scoot down out of the way of that nav bar. I'm going to leave my offset Y at 0 because we don't have anything like that going on. And now when I select features, I can create a link that links to home. That's the page that we're currently on. That's the page where this section exists. And once I've selected that page, I now get an option called section. And from the section dropdown, I can choose features. Now, when you link to a section, you get an extra property here called scroll. And that lets us choose between jumping instantly to this section or instead having a smooth scroll effect that scrolls the viewer down past all the things that are in between and stops at the section. Let me fix my link style here real quick. And now let's take a look at how that works in the preview window. So I hover over features, it turns blue, it gets underlined, which is exactly what was dictated in our link style. And when I click, boom, there's that smooth scroll effect and the top of the section stops when it reaches the top of the browser here. Pretty cool. So all these links so far have been applied to entire text layers, but like I mentioned earlier, you can also highlight just a range of text within a paragraph, and you can add a link to that as well. So by clicking on link here, and in this case, you don't want to use the keyboard shortcut. If I press the letter L, it's going to replace the highlighted text with the letter L. Don't want to do that. So in this case, I definitely want to click to add the link here on the properties panel. Now, let's say we want this to link to a particular blog post. If I type blog, especially if I type blog / which is where my posts live, we see here something called a slug. This is what you'll see if you're linking to a CMS entry, if you're linking to a page that's created by the CMS. So if we choose slug here, we can then choose in the next dropdown which specific blog post we want this to link to. So I'll choose styling elements here, for example. Cool. So again, everything that we've done so far has been with text. Let's take a look at adding a link to something that isn't a text layer. I'm going to click on Get Started here. Now, the default selection mechanics mean that when I click in Framer, I'm going to get the most deeply nested layer under my cursor. So in this case, I actually grabbed the text layer, but what I'd really like is that whole button frame. So what I'm going to do is press the Escape key to go up one level in the hierarchy. And now that I've got the whole button selected, I'll click to add my link. Now, one thing we haven't done here yet is link to an external page. So I'll do that. I'll just type https://framer.com. Now, I could also go and copy this from the browser so I don't have to type quite so much, or if I'm not sure if it's an HTTPS or if it's HTTP, it's always safest to just copy and paste from a page that you've pulled up in the browser, because you know if you've pulled it up in your browser that it's correct. And when I hit return to lock that in, again, we get the option to open in a new tab or not. The last thing I want to point out is that if we look over on the layers panel, there is a little tiny link icon that shows which layers have links applied to them. So here you can see it's the button that has the link. It's not the text layer within it. And another thing I want to point out is that you can't have an element with a link applied to it within another element that has a link applied to it. That's a conflict, because where's it going to take you when you click on the link? Even if they link to the same place, it's still technically a conflict. So if I try to add a link to the child of this frame that already has a link, we get a little message that says, hey, the parent already has a link applied to it. So we can decide whether or not we want to leave it alone or if we want to go to the parent and remove the parent link and instead put it on the child layer. But that is completely up to us. And that's it. Now you know how to add links, how to style them, how to link to other pages of your site, how to link to external pages, as well as how to get that smooth scrolling effect to link to different sections of your site. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.